Okay, welcome back to Multiversal Conquest, and this is basically where it's not so much two characters fight, but more like two factions war it out. And this is one I kind of been thinking about doing for a little while. Like, this is one I've been thinking about wanting to do for, like, since I started the inception of this little series. And that is the Skrulls from Marvel Comics versus the Klingons from Star Trek. So yeah, Skrulls versus Klingons. So, what would it be like if the Skrulls and the Klingons went to war? What would that be like if these two races had an open war? Now, for context of where we are for Klingon Empire, we're going to say like somewhere in Next Generation, but we will not have the Federation backing them up. This will be solely Klingon Empire taking on the Skrull Empire, and this will not be the Skrull Empire fused with the Kree Skrull Empire. This will just solely be the Skrulls on their own. So, Skrull-Klingon War, how would that go out? So let's talk a bit about the Klingons first. So the Klingons, one of the oldest races in the Star Trek universe, warlike race. Everything in their empire is built for war. That is literally the whole thing, is that they are literally an empire that functions by war. As long as there's war, the Klingon Empire stands. Their ships consist of some of their smaller scout ships, like the Birds of Prey, can cloak. Others are heavy carriers. Others are massive warships. They are everything about the Klingon Empire is just built for the Klingon war engine. The other thing is that the your basic Klingon soldier carries, of course, phasers that are usually not meant for stun. They also have the Klingon battle knives. I know they have a name, but I can't remember it. So they've got knives, and the Klingon batleth, the close combat sword. Klingon warriors are bred from a young age to be warriors. Every man and woman of the Klingon Empire is literally trained from a young age to be a hand-to-hand fighter, a soldier, and a member of a starship. So that's what you're dealing with the Klingon Empire. These are the guys who have waged war against the Cardassians, Romulans, and the Federation all at once, and actually did pretty damn good for the longest time. But there you go about the Klingon Empire. Now let's talk about the Skrull Empire. Now the Skrulls are one of the most powerful empires in the Marvel universe, along with the Kree and Shi'ar. The Skrulls, of course, as we all know, one of the biggest enemies of the Fantastic Four in the Marvel universe at large, and of course they have a genetic ability to shapeshift into anyone or into any other being they see. So the Skrulls are also excellent hand-to-hand fighters. They have warships that are massive. Their armadas have basically held their own against like the Shi'ar and the Kree and other alien races throughout the Marvel universe. But here's another thing the Skrulls have outside of the ability to shapeshift. They have some genetic enhancements. Not only am I talking about like Skrulls like Titanus, the metallic, like the cybernetically enhanced Skrull, or Pybok, the power Skrull, or even the super Skrull color. You're talking about Skrulls that have basically created other super Skrulls from the DNA of Marvel heroes. So you have so the Skrull Empire have an entire legion of genetically enhanced super Skrulls that have abilities of several Marvel heroes, and like not just one, but like several at once. Like one could like be shouting like Black Bolt while shooting optic beams, or another could have Wolverine's claws while also having Spider-Man's abilities. That's what you're dealing with the Skrull Empire. So in a open war between the Skrulls and the Klingons, what would that be like if these two empires went to war? So like I said, your basic Klingon soldier is bred for war, but so are the Skrulls. Remember, their whole thing was we fight a race called the Kree since time immemorial. So we know a thing or two about war, and we fight metahumans on Earth. So we know a thing or two about, warfare. But so do the Klingons. Ever since day one, they've been bred for combat. So when you put these two empires together, fleet-wise, the Skrull Empire fleet are these massive ships that are made to be almost like Star Destroyers in a way. Like, there's just these massive warships that are just ferry multiple troops at once. Whereas the Klingon Empire warships are these more or less like battle fleets that are all offense, very little defense. And these the Klingons usually attack in massive numbers. And if you were going by a ground troop assault, you have to look at it like that the Klingons would fight, on their, they relish on the idea of attacking an enemy on the ground. Like, these guys would love to just beam down and start attacking soldiers head on in just a head-on war. Like, if it came down to like a head-on fight between the Skrulls and the Klingons would just beam down with bat'leths and phasers ready for a close quarters combat. But like I said before, the Skrulls have something the Klingons don't. Shape-shifting. Now, you may bring up the argument of, they've encountered shapeshifters before. Hell, the changelings from the Dominion, they've encountered those. Hell, Galron, Galron was a changeling, and he manipulated them. Well, unfortunately, the Klingons aren't known for learning their mistakes. In fact, they didn't really have technology after the events with the Dominion to really tell who's a shapeshifter. And the Skrulls are really good at head-on conflict, but they're also really good at sabotaging others. So they could easily, infiltrate several important areas in the Klingon Empire and sabotage it from within, and the Klingons would be none the wiser. That's a major thing, is that, like I said, the Klingons didn't really learn a lot from their war with the Dominion, encountering the changelings and whatnot. So they're not going to learn from a second time. And probably when they do discover that the Skrulls can shapeshift, that's just going to add more fear and paranoia, because they're like, we dealt with this before in the Klingon Empire with the changelings, and everyone would be like accusing one another, or it would be like mass hysteria in the Klingon Empire, but they don't want to project fear, so it'd just be more anger and, more infighting. And a lot of the Klingon clans, might I add, are not really... Many of the Klingon houses are not exactly the most friendly to each other, especially after the war with the Dominion, so... That's a problem. That is going to be a problem when you add that more fuel to the fire of just that paranoia and that aggression. All of that's going to be a problem. Not to mention, the Skrulls have Pybok, Titanus, Kalert, and the multitude of other enhanced Skrulls they have on their side. Like, they could just start dispatching Skrulls out into space, even, like, just open up a hatch and all these Skrulls that are bred for, in-space combat come flying out. Or even have Kalert just tear his way through several Klingon ships. Now, I'm not saying that the Klingons are completely helpless in this situation, far from it. I do believe that the Klingons do have several advantages. Klingons, like I said, usually will usually have a one-up. And that one-up is that these guys fight in mass numbers, whereas the Skrulls prefer to fight in, like, small hit-and-run moves. The Klingons don't... and if the hit-and-run moves don't work, they run away. Klingons don't let you run away. That's the other thing, is that the Klingons prefer to fight head-on, whereas the Skrulls prefer to fight in, like, these shadow warfare. They will fight open warfare, but that's not their forte. Skrulls will do, like, hit-and-run maneuvers and just haul ass. Klingons are not going to let you just hit and run. That's not a war you're going to win with the Klingons, especially when... you see, the Skrull Empire isn't built for... It is built for war, excuse me. It is built for war, but not for fighting opponents that have these kind of, like, heavy-based weaponry. They're more they are more adept with fighting like races that have like smaller fleets and whatnot. And these guys, the Skrulls, also have, they do have a big military, but it's not as massive or as, you know, well diverse as the Klingon Empire. But you also have to remember that the Skrulls also share a universe where they fight metahumans, the Kree, the Shi'ar, and the Shi'ar have this little thing called the Imperial Guard, so they have to be on well guard to take on that. So this is a tough one. I am going to give it slightly to the Skrulls, mostly because these guys have not only like the shape-shifting ability, and the Klingons didn't really learn jack shit from their war with the Dominion, but also because the Skrulls have those army of enhanced Skrulls, and of course Super Skrull and Pybok, and just also they have technology that they will build because they're so scientifically advanced, more so than the Klingons. Because have you ever heard of a renowned Klingon scientist? No, you haven't. So the Skrulls will like have a science division built to, I guarantee you, if there was a war between the Klingons and Skrulls, the Skrulls would whip up a literal Klingon anti-Klingon science division to combat their cloaking devices, or their ion cannons, or even like how to disable their phasers, or, you know, reverse engineer the material in your batleth to make it like just zap it and it turns to dust. So that's the big thing. That's a major line that I think I'm going to give it more to the Skrulls. The Klingons, no doubt, no joke, would put up a hell of a fight. I do think the Klingons could hold their own against the Skrulls for a while. But after a while, the Skrulls will eventually like either sabotage the Klingon Empire from within, or they'll, you know, pull some pseudoscience out of their ass and proceed to stomp the Klingons into the ground. The Skrulls will play the long game. Klingons want to play the long game, but they aren't built for it. So that's the major factor you have to look at, is that the Klingons play the long game. The Skrulls play the long game every time. So you guys tell me in the comments below, who do you think would come out on top in this war? Do you think the Skrulls would win, or do you think the Klingons would win? And once again, as always, I have to stress that please don't send requests. This is just my personal thing. Once again, I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time in the Multiverse.